Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the San Francisco Interfaith Council online briefing for faith leaders. Today's topic, the challenges, benefits, and opportunities of volunteering in these times of COVID-19. This program is hosted by the San Francisco Interfaith Council and supported by the Joint Information Center of the San Francisco COVID Command Center. Audio, video, and chat will be monitored and recorded for record keeping, training purposes, and quality assurance. By default, all participants will be muted and video turned off to minimize distractions. To submit a question or comment, select the chat button at the bottom of your screen and send a message to Q&A. They will be collected and shared with the Interfaith Council at the end of the meeting for response. Finally, a reminder to get tested San Francisco, stop the spread of COVID-19, and schedule your appointment at sf.gov, get tested SF, or simply call 311. Once again, welcome to the San Francisco Interfaith Council online briefing for faith leaders. And I will now hand it over to Michael Pappas, the Executive Director of the San Francisco Interfaith Council.
Thank you so much, Lynn. Good morning. I'm Michael Pappas, and on behalf of the San Francisco Interfaith Council, I want to welcome you to this morning's online briefing for faith leaders. Given the many challenges presented by the coronavirus pandemic, a show of solidarity exhibited through volunteering is heartening. In the current crisis, being connected with a cause and collaborating with others toward a common goal can be comforting and help people overcome feelings of inertia and helplessness. At the same time, the COVID-19 has presented our city and state with pressing demands, which has increased the need for volunteers. This week's online briefing for faith leaders, hosted by the San Francisco Interfaith Council and supported by the COVID Command Center's Joint Information Center virtual outreach team, will shine a spotlight on the challenges, benefits, and opportunities of volunteering in these times of the COVID-19. At this time, it gives me great pleasure to welcome the Chairman of the Board of the San Francisco Interfaith Council, Kaushik Roy.
Thank you, Michael. Good morning, everybody. On behalf of the Board of Directors, I want to thank all of you for joining us for, I think this is our 18th community meeting, Michael. I might be off by one or two over the last 4.5 months. Earlier this week marked 5 months since the mayor initially declared the shelter in place back in March 16th, and I suspect it feels like it's been a lot longer than that for all of us. I am personally really excited about this morning's conversation. Another hat I wear in the community is being the executive director of a nonprofit called Untitled Project, one of the city's pioneering nonprofits in building human connections. And at the beginning of the shelter in place, the city had contacted Shanti and asked us to put together a essentially core of emergency response volunteers who would be able to tend to the essential needs of folks who might be isolated or quarantined or homebound for any other reason. And I just share that because with the lack of bandwidth we had, I was forced into direct service for the first time in over a decade. And I am so glad that I was, because interacting with the folks who wanted to step up for the community has just been an amazing experience, and personally has given me a lot of hope amidst the darkness that we see in our world right now. So I want to thank Candace, of course, as our presenter speaker, and then the panelists who I know, Meredith and Katie and Phyllis. Thank you all for being here. If you are joining us for the first time at an interfaith event, I want to give a special welcome to you. And at the beginning of every Interfaith Council meeting or gathering, there is an interfaith statement we like to read. So I'll do that now and we will continue. This is an interfaith community. Whatever our individual belief, it can be freely expressed here with no apologies. If we are invited to offer a prayer in this setting, it should be offered according to the tradition with which we identify. If we are invited to speak on a subject from the perspective of our tradition, we are free to do so without fear of offending those who come from another tradition. We come together as people of faith to learn from each other that we might better understand the multiplicity of faith traditions in our city and in our world. Good morning, everyone.
Thank you, Kaushik. Thank you for your leadership and support. You've made my job a little easier. And I also would like to thank Shanti for all that it is doing during the pandemic and beyond. Your work is commendable and appreciate it. Thank you. At this time, it gives me great pleasure to welcome a colleague and a dear friend, Rabbi Alan Bennett, the Rabbi Emeritus of Temple Israel of Alameda, who will ground us in a meditative moment.
Thank you, Michael. Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to offer this morning's meditation. For those of us who work in the nonprofit sector, whether religious or not, or who have worked either for pay or as volunteers, or both, we know how complex the issue of volunteering really is. We have neither the time nor the interest for me to go into this in depth this morning, but other speakers will. But I do want to offer some questions for thought and some things to ponder, rather than giving answers about the issue and its complexity. In almost all of our various religious traditions, we do a lot of praying. Judaism, however, makes a distinction about what we can pray for and when. We are taught not to pray to God to do something for us unless and until we have exhausted our own efforts to make that thing happen. With that in mind, we ought not ask for God's help unless or until we have done everything we could to engage other people to assist us in our tasks, to find more people to volunteer, to lend a hand, to address and right a wrong. When we live in times of such chaos and bewilderment, fear and divisiveness, finding the strength to rise above those challenges and to reach out to help others is a task in and of itself that we often have trouble believing we can do. So let's agree that especially in difficult times like these, volunteering calls on us to rise above and beyond our own troubles, to strive continually to be our very best selves, to be heroic sometimes, even when we think we need more to be helped than we need to be helping. With the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as economic terror and government incompetence and malevolence all around us, we know full well how hard it is sometimes to reach beyond ourselves. But we also know that these are the very times when such efforts are critical and vital. I'm also reminded of a passage from the Talmud which says that even the poorest recipient of charity in the community is still obligated to give alms. This may be one of the earliest recorded examples of paying it forward. And when we volunteer, that is specifically and exactly what we are doing. We have learned or relearned a lot in the past few months about the things that hold our society together, as well as the things that tear us apart. Since the pandemic hit us, we've been forced to see things that we either hadn't seen before, hadn't been willing to acknowledge before, or which had been so overwhelming even to consider that we simply avoided trying to deal with them. This includes things like systemic racism, inequities in healthcare, education, housing, banking, criminal justice and law enforcement, reproductive rights, environmental justice, and many, many more. But as the pandemic has spread throughout the country and the world, and especially as we've seen the ongoing epidemic of the murder of unarmed Black men and Black transgendered women, we have finally started to acknowledge the results of the long-term effects on the marginalized in our society. The chronically disadvantaged were the hardest hit from day one, and they still are. The difference is that it simply is no longer possible to ignore their plight without our being motivated to try to help fix things. We can now name as never before what needs fixing, as well as what it takes to make those changes. If there ever were a clear path marked for us as to how to proceed, we can see that path more clearly now. Since we're all faced with choices we have to make about how to use whatever resources we have, we all know that sometimes those choices are hard, very hard. Sometimes we don't know, and we don't necessarily know how to know what the right thing to do is. But we know in our heart of hearts that we want to do the right thing, even if we're not sure of exactly what that might be. That's one of those points where we not only have the right to pray for God's help and intervention, we have the obligation to do so. This idea brought to mind one of my favorite Edgar Guest poems, especially in terms of our choosing whether or how to be involved in the inevitable moral struggles for change. The poem goes like this. Is anybody happier because you passed his way? Does anyone remember that you spoke to them today? The day is almost over and its toiling time is through. Is there anyone to utter now a kindly word of you? Did you give a cheerful greeting to the friend who came along? Or a churlish sort of howdy and then vanish in the throng? Were you selfish, pure and simple as you rushed along the way? Or is someone mighty grateful for a deed you did today? Can you say tonight in parting with the day that's slipping fast that you helped a single person of the many that you passed? Is a single heart rejoicing over what you did or said? Does someone whose hopes were fading now with courage look ahead? Did you waste the day or lose it? Was it well or sorely spent? Did you leave a trail of kindness or a scar of discontent? As you close your eyes in slumber, do you think that God would say, you have earned one more tomorrow by the work you did today? We never know when that last small measure of selfless devotion will make a person's day, when, despite our exhaustion, both spiritual and physical, we do just one more thing and thereby inspire someone else to reach beyond themselves. We are not just good role models. We are doing the holiest work. And then there is empathy fatigue. Every day we wake up to heartbreaking, upsetting news. Over 170,000 people have died from the coronavirus in this country alone, and with the willful mismanagement of the pandemic by the administration in Washington, we know that thousands more will die in the days and weeks to come. This has a tragically direct connection to the collapsing economy, not only here at home, but throughout the country and around the world. Millions of people have lost their jobs and healthcare coverage. At least thousands, if not millions, are faced with the possibility or probability of losing their homes as well. As of last Sunday evening, both houses of Congress had left Washington for vacation. How do we reconcile that? We're faced with the awful choice of keeping our children home from school and having them fall farther and farther behind, both academically and socially, or sending them to school for in-person classes where they have an increased risk of exposure to the virus, and from there, the potential spread of the virus to their teachers, family members, and schoolmates. We in the religious nonprofit world want to help, and we want to encourage others to join us as we try to help by volunteering with us. Still, with the total lack of appropriate assistance from the federal government and with the states collapsing economically, and with everyone wondering if or how our own agencies, institutions, or houses of worship will even be able to survive, where and to whom are we supposed to turn to ask for volunteers? It's like asking people with teaspoons of water to help put out a 5-alarm fire. At the same time, we know both individually and institutionally that we must do something, and that includes finding new and creative ways to inspire others to volunteer, even when they think that they've either given everything they can already, or they believe that their efforts would not be good or sufficient enough. Where do we turn for that inspiration, that strength, that creativity, that fortitude? So let me conclude with some quotations. The places that I turn when it has come to the point where I've done enough that I feel that it's okay to ask for God's help. First, from the Mishnah, from the famous Rabbi Hillel, he said, if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? But if I am for myself alone, what am I? And if not now, when? Second, also from the Mishnah, it says, it's not incumbent upon you to complete the task, but neither are you free to desist from it altogether. No, you don't have to do the whole thing, but you know that if it's going to get done, you will have to do your part too. Third, I shall pass this way but once. Therefore, any good that I can do or any kindness I can show to any human being, let me do it now. Let me not defer nor neglect it, for I shall not pass this way again. So I ask that we be continually inspired to extend our reach even farther than we ever believed we could. May we walk with our arms open, welcoming and inviting and inspiring others to join with us in facing our circumstances, especially when we are asked or expected to go beyond whatever it is that we thought we signed up for. In so doing, may we always be role models on a daily basis of being constant and dependable volunteers in what is undoubtedly holy work towards holy ends. And then, as we close our eyes in slumber, let us pray that God would say, "You have earned one more tomorrow by the work you did today." Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Bennett. And with these words that have inspired us, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Candace Aquino, who is the Regional Volunteer Coordinator for California Volunteers. California Volunteers has been an important partner of the San Francisco Interfaith Council in our disaster preparedness, response, and recovery work, and we are very grateful to Candace for being with us today. Her impressive bio is in the program, so in the interest of time, I would just present Candace, and we look forward to her presentation.
Thank you, Michael, and good morning. Really great to be here with you all, and thank you, Alan, for that blessing. It was really a great way to start the morning, so I appreciate that. I'm going to share my screen now with a short presentation that I've put together for our meeting today. So as Michael mentioned, I'm the Regional Volunteer Coordinator for California Volunteers serving in Region 2 of the Cal OES map, which is a breakup of about 6 different regions in the state. So I'm one of 6 other coordinators who has been brought on to work with organizations and communities throughout the state to help address issues involving food insecurity. So one of our core missions as California Volunteers in the role of the emergency services functions has been to act as the lead agency for sourcing volunteer and service staffing needs for disaster response missions that are requested by counties when they cannot meet their local needs. We have served as the last line of defense to date with kind of our assistance in deploying state assets like the National Guard and the Conservation Corps. Team Rubicon has been a wonderful partner. These are emergency staffing options that we've been able to deploy throughout the state. And that started back in March at the onset of the pandemic. Since that time, California Volunteers has worked to help food banks and community partners transition from these emergency staffing models. As you, I'm sure all know, with the onset of the fire season and other sort of natural disasters that these National Guard and CCC staff members must be constantly prepared for, we want to be sure that they're used as that resource on an emergency basis. And so to help food banks with that sort of transition back to volunteer staffing, we've had a lot of success with getting Californians to answer this call of service. So through the CaliforniansForAll website, which I've linked here, and I'd love to share with Michael, who can share it with you all at the end of this presentation. We've been able to bring on many Californians throughout the state who are interested in getting involved in their community. There are options through this site and to get involved at different levels based on a person's skill set or their ability to serve. This has been a real work in progress. When we first started this call to action back in April, we had many members sign up, or many community members sign up. And since that time, we've worked to fine tune the process of getting them connected with volunteer opportunities in their community. One of the partnerships that I wanted to mention is with our volunteer match program, which is an opportunity for food banks and other volunteer centers to post their volunteer opportunities as shifts through this website. And there's a link through the CaliforniansForAll site for anybody who is interested in signing up. So I wanted to take a moment to just give some updates on the CaliforniansForAll sort of progress to date. As I mentioned, through the call to action, through the Office of the Governor, as well as the California Volunteers efforts, we've been able to bring on over 46,000 volunteers through that website. We have made connections with over 52,000 individuals in the state, as well as organizations who, again, have been really interested in getting involved and using their resources and their time, especially during the shelter in place, to really help those most in need at this time. One other program that we took on this summer was the Summer of Service, which was an opportunity to engage high school and college-aged individuals in a volunteer service opportunity. So through this program, we have signed up over nearly 2,000 young people to participate. And through this program, the participants have been asked to complete a volunteer log, which tracks their hours. We have 20 volunteer logs submitted so far, with 1,300 volunteer hours reported. And of those participants, those who do complete 10, 50, or 100 hours will be recognized by our first partner, Jennifer Siebel-Newsome, and the Chief Service Officer for California Volunteers, Josh Friday. As an added benefit for these individuals, this is oftentimes helping them to meet some of their educational requirements. So especially for those who are entering into the fields of social work, or in some cases it's the medical field, this experience working in their community and completing this sort of, in some ways, first experience of community service has been something that has helped to propel them into this field as a career. So we're really excited about that, and are working on extending this program to a semester of service where we can continue to engage with individuals throughout their now mostly remote learning process. So there'll be more news on that to come. I encourage everyone to take a look at the California Volunteers website for more info on that. Another project that we've recently undertaken is the VISTA Project through a partnership with AmeriCorps. Myself, along with my 5 other colleagues, the regional coordinators throughout the state, have conducted initial site assessments with many of the food banks and volunteer centers who had received these state deployed assets like the National Guard and the CCC. And by asking about the current needs and how we can be of assistance, we learned from these sites that in some cases, it would be really helpful to have additional staffing to help with their volunteer recruitment, volunteer training, retention, and to really help to restructure the volunteer model in a way that's sustainable in light of the current pandemic and in anticipation of the ongoing sort of effects of this widespread health crisis. So the VISTA Project was an opportunity for us to work with AmeriCorps to bring on 52 members from throughout the state of California. These 52 members are split up by VISTA leaders who will help as mentors and to help provide these 47 members with the resources that they need to be successful in their mission to help with capacity building at volunteer centers and food banks. So we've just actually started the first onboarding process for the first group, which started on August 17th, this Monday. And we will expect the rest of our members to start on the 31st of August. This is across 26 different sites in the state. And one of our amazing panelists, Katie, is one of the sites where a VISTA member will be placed. And so we're really excited to be able to support not only food banks throughout the state, but also the SF Marin Food Bank, which is such an amazing resource for local community members and clients who are in need. Just a kind of a quick list of some of the sites where these VISTA members will be placed. Like I mentioned, this is throughout the state of California. For those on the call today, and because I'm the Region 2 coordinator, the sites selected in the immediate region in the Bay Area have been Hands-On Bay Area, which is based here in San Francisco. We also, like I mentioned, have the SF Marin Food Bank. We are also partnering with the Second Harvest Food Bank serving Santa Cruz and the Volunteer Center of Santa Cruz. The last site is the, in my region, is the California Association of Food Banks as a statewide partner. Their offices in Alameda have agreed to host 2 of our VISTA members, and that's a really critical sort of post where that organization helps to serve other food banks and volunteer centers throughout the state. And so I wanted to just provide my contact information here. I know that this information will be shared with you at the end of the presentation, but to again, just let you know that as our mission continues to evolve and we work to not only help these sites transition into a volunteer staffing model in a way that works best for each site, which we've learned the needs are very specialized and particular. We are also looking to build an infrastructure that is sustainable for the foreseeable future, that we have an army of volunteers who are ready to be activated in the event of a statewide emergency like we've experienced with the COVID crisis. So I wanted to just pause there and see if there's any questions about the information I've shared, or if it's best we can wait until the end. I know we have some more speakers today.
Candace, thank you very much. And as you mentioned, we will be sending out these opportunities to volunteer through California Volunteers and Volunteers for All at the conclusion by day's end today. One of the things you said struck a personal tone with me, and that is I am the father of an AmeriCorps alum. And I know how that experience changed his life. And it is a reminder that, you know, when we volunteer with the intent of helping others, but there are some profound changes that happen within us when we volunteer, and our lives are enriched. And so I thank you for raising that. And you are among friends today. I know we have a number of your friends and colleagues who are going to give some brief presentations now and then ask some questions of you. In the spirit of full disclosure, I have to tell you that the San Francisco Interfaith Council was born out of 2 crises, a homeless crisis and the Loma Prieta earthquake. And both of those crises demanded that we that we harness volunteers. And so that has been part of the DNA of the San Francisco Interfaith Council and the relationship with the three panelists that we have today. So we share some of that DNA with you. Our first panelist is Katie McKnight, the Director of Community Engagement at the San Francisco Marin Food Bank. The San Francisco Marin Food Bank has been a very, very important partner of ours on a number of levels. Throughout the city and county of San Francisco, a number of our congregations host pantries, which is important in getting food out to the community. At the same time, they've also been an integral resource for us in our Interfaith Winter Shelter for those congregations who would like to provide meals but might not have the resources to be able to expend the dollars. So we send them to the food bank, and the food bank provides them with those resources so that they can serve prepare meals and serve at our Interfaith Winter Shelter. Most recently, and this is how I came to know Katie McKnight, who will be our first presenter, we collaborated on the 9/11 Day of Service, which harnessed so many volunteers to prepare so many meals for those in our community and give us a unique opportunity to honor the memory of those who perished at 9/11. So it is without further ado, but with incredible joy, that I introduce Katie McKnight, Director of Community Engagement at the San Francisco Marin Food Bank.
Thank you so much, Michael. And it's an honor to be here. As I was sort of scrolling through the names, to your point, Michael, I recognized so many names from those that host a pantry or have had a food drive or have reached out to say, what can I do to help? So thank you. This community is just so supportive and such a great partner to the food bank. So I just wanted to share the love as well. I'd love to take a couple of minutes and just talk about what the food bank is doing and sort of like where we've come, and then what our future, as best as we can guess, kind of looks like, and share sort of how impactful volunteers and the partnerships we've made through friends like Candace and Cal Volunteers, and sort of what we think we're going to need moving forward. To set the stage a little bit, pre-pandemic, the food bank saw anywhere between 1,200 and 1,400 volunteers a week between our two warehouses here in San Francisco and our warehouse up in San Rafael. And many of those volunteers were corporate groups that had brought their employees in to volunteer. That has always been a big part of our volunteer base. And I think back to the middle of March when the shelter in place was started, and looking at my team, my volunteer team, one of my roles here at the food bank is I oversee all of our volunteer programming, and our email just started pinging with group cancellations, and we lost, from the middle of March to the beginning of May, we lost about 4,000 volunteer spots over about a 4-day period. It was just cancellation after cancellation. And after a slight panic, we reached out to this community, and the San Francisco, the Bay Area community is so supportive of their time that we were able to recoup nearly all of those volunteer spots by individuals and by families who just we hear all the time, they just needed to give back and needed to feel a purpose. And we were incredibly grateful that allowed us to continue operations as we sort of learned how we were going to scale. So in response to the pandemic, the food bank has operated in a couple of ways. The first was helping shore up our partner agencies that were able to stay online. A lot of our partner agencies, a lot of our food pantries, almost a third of them had to close in response to the pandemic. So our first line of defense was, how can we help keep those open? And in many cases, that was recruiting volunteers, from volunteers that now had to shelter in place or didn't want to be out in the community. So it was, let's get our partners all of the support they need so that they can stay open. And then our second line of defense was to start really expanding our home delivered grocery program. So we knew that many of our sites that closed catered specifically to seniors, and that as the most vulnerable population, they were all staying home, and we needed a way to get them access to groceries every week. And it was about 12,000 seniors that we needed to serve each week. So we expanded what we call our pantry at home, our programming here on site. I'll talk a little bit more about what that actually looks like, and to reach all of those homebound seniors. And then our third opportunity, our third way to serve the community, was opening what we call our pop-up pantries. So these are our emergent pop-up pantries, of which we now have 28 of these that we operate every week across San Francisco and Marin. To sort of to share pre-pandemic, we had about 275 pantries across San Francisco and Marin that were operated by our partner agencies. So we are now operating 28 of them that are food bank driven and food bank led with the support of volunteers. And when I look back at the growth of our programming, we went from that 1,200 volunteers a week pre-pandemic to right now our team is managing about 3,200 volunteers every week that are both in our warehouses and also out supporting these pop-up pantries, supporting these pantry at home initiatives. So that's a huge spike that is comprised primarily of individuals and families just wanting to give back. We've also been incredibly lucky to have the support of the County of San Francisco, who has deployed disaster service workers. For us, they are mostly coming from the San Francisco Public Library. So we've had, I think, 4 or 5 deployments of between 60 and 130 disaster service workers that for us has been just a consistent workforce to help us enable to grow as quickly as we were able to. So we went from no pantries that we the food bank were running to about 25 in just about a month, and then we've just continued to grow from there. So when we look at our volunteer base, the other thing about volunteering at the food bank is it looks so different than it ever has before. One of the things the food bank prides itself on is our pantry distributions are typically, we call them farmers market style. And the idea is the food is set up to invoke a shopping experience and to really allow our participants to pick and choose what works for them and their family. But when we want to ensure appropriate physical distancing and minimizing contact, et cetera, we've had to flip our distribution model completely. And the way we're operating our pantries now is I sort of liken to Henry Ford coming to the food bank, and it's very much assembly line style. So our volunteers will start at one end of the distribution. They will visit each pallet along the way, loading product into the grocery bag, and then that bag is dropped off at our table at the front where the participants are able to take their weekly grocery distribution. So to operate 28 of those, which those pantries range in size from 500 to 1,500 participants, that takes a lot of dedicated volunteers who are willing to walk up and down the product layout and just continually refill those bags. So it's been, Michael talked about how heartwarming seeing the response has been, and we echo that. Just all of the volunteers that are just coming out to, whether they are volunteering with us. We have some volunteers that volunteer at a pantry every single day. It's so impressive to see how committed they are to our work. And then we have those that, they go to a different pantry every week, so they feel they are supporting all parts of the city, which is really great for us. The other big change is really the size of our volunteer shifts. So to ensure that we are being as safe as possible and adhering to all of the guidelines, which, as we all remember at the beginning, changed, it felt like almost every day the safety guidelines changed. So we were changing our operations nearly daily. We have decreased many of our shift capacities and increased the number of shifts so that we're able to still provide opportunities for everybody who wants to get involved while making sure safety is top of mind. And for those that have volunteered in our warehouse before, you might have been in our repack room, or you might have helped glean produce in our other indoor volunteer space. One, we lost that space to store product. The food bank right now is distributing double the amount of product we were before the pandemic, so we need a place to put all of that food. So we built a tent in our parking lot, so we had outdoor volunteer space. We moved all of our volunteers outside, and so that's a totally different experience than we have ever had before. So we have volunteers working 2 to 5 shifts a day out in our tent in our warehouse, specifically packing these bags that are being delivered to homebound seniors. That's sort of the second really big call to action we've had, is helping us keep that production. We're producing 2,400 to 2,800 bags a day that are then being delivered by a mix of some corporate partners like Amazon who are delivering food, but also a huge community volunteer base that pick up 10 to 15 bags, and they have a route and they go and deliver all of these bags to the doorstep of some of the most vulnerable populations in San Francisco. So we have really been reaching out to try to recruit volunteers to help make those routes. We know that there are more seniors on that list that we would love to be able to deliver these home delivered groceries to, so they can stay home and stay as safe as possible. So there's a constant need for those volunteers. And then really lastly, these disaster service workers that we've had are so fantastic, but we know at some point they're going to need to go back to work. So while we have been able to really rely on them, and we know that that may come to an end, so we look forward to, via Michael, sharing out the opportunities to get involved with the food bank, because we don't know what our new future looks like. We know we are going to continue to operate these pop-up pantries and this pantry at home as long as it's needed. And we know, much like the other panelists, those that we serve are they're the last to see sort of the economic recovery. So we know our services are going to be needed for a very long time, and we don't expect to scale back any of our services anytime soon. So we know that the need for volunteering is just going to continue to grow. That's sort of the high level of where the food bank has been and what we're doing and how we're going to continue to go forward. And I'd love to sort of share back a question to Candace, just to sort of look at how things are here versus the rest of the state. And Candace, if you could share, between you and then your other regional leaders, are there any trends that are different here in the Bay Area versus the rest of the state when it comes to volunteering, or are we sort of all facing the same kinds of challenges?
Yeah, thanks, Katie. That's a great question. We definitely see that there's a lot of variation. So in my region specifically, I serve from the county of Monterey up to Del Norte. So even within that area, we see counties who are in the very northern part of the state. Their challenges for food banks are access and just physical distance from pantries, whereas in more highly dense populated areas like San Francisco, San Jose, the challenge is how to safely provide food to clients and to get volunteers engaged, which came in as a question actually in the chat from Rita Liu, who asked about some of the measures being taken to safely have volunteers engage, and how do you ensure that people are able to follow social distancing guidelines. So that's one of the kind of efforts that we've been kind of involved in. I know, Katie, at your site as a food bank, and another great highlight is at the Alameda County Community Food Bank. There's been a really detailed process for how to not necessarily screen volunteers, but how to prepare them for service, safe service. And so there's, at the Alameda Food Bank, there's a questionnaire that all volunteers are asked to fill out that asks, and I think at the SF Food Bank as well, do you certify that you've had no symptoms within the last 2 weeks? Do you certify that you haven't had, a fever, are you, and in some cases, there's actually a temperature check when you arrive for service, but basically doing a screening to see about having volunteers check in about any symptoms that they might be experiencing. And then the second part of that is obviously PPE and making sure that each volunteer is provided personal protective equipment, including masks and gloves, which I know at the sites that Katie manages, that's something that is always available. There's hand sanitizer, and the model that Katie also mentioned of just adapting services. So these pop-up pantries have been really amazing to see what your team has been able to do by creating these outdoor spaces where people can volunteer, distribute these these goods to families in a really open air, spaced out kind of way, so that there's not as much direct contact with clients, which presents its own challenges. I know it's tough not to be able to connect with clients like that, but yes, so I mean, to To your question, yes, there's a lot of different needs, and a lot of it has to do with the clients in the community and how they've already had issues of access, and then how that's compounded by this COVID crisis, and then the food banks that are sort of adjusting to make sure that they can continue to serve. So that's something that we're seeing. And I just have to echo your sentiment that the one thing that the Bay Area is not lacking in is really concerned and active and mobile citizens who want to be involved. And so I feel really fortunate to be working in this region, and some of my colleagues are having, more challenges getting individuals to join Californians for All, to join other volunteer opportunities. So that's something that I think we definitely have as a resource, is the people power.
Thank you.
Wonderful. And, I know, Candace, in your presentation, you highlighted the very special relationship you have during the pandemic with a number of food banks, and we are very grateful for the relationship you have with the San Francisco Marin Food Bank. Additionally, I wanted to mention that due to the nature of this particular theme this week, we have a robust number of questions coming through the chat. We will be directing them to our panelists, and they will be responding to you directly. So we thank you, we encourage you, but in the spirit of time, we have to be very conscious. We have two more wonderful panelists. The next is Phyllis Onstadt, the program manager for San Francisco Community Agencies Responding to Disaster. The Interfaith Council was not only the fiscal sponsor for SF Card, but has worked very closely with SF Card over the years. Since Hurricane Katrina, we have hosted with our partners in disaster every other year a disaster preparedness workshop for congregations. And what we've done is we have steered the attendees and the participants and encouraged them to engage with SF Card, to create disaster plans, as well as to attend a number of their trainings. So we are very, very grateful. And now we are working with SF Card on their Listos collaboration with the state. So with that, Phyllis Onstadt, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Again, my name is Phyllis. I'm with SF Card. In one of my previous positions, I actually worked for California Volunteers. So disaster volunteer management has been an issue that is near and dear to my heart for many years. And before I start, I just want to remind us of the need to be kind to one another, and the need to take a breath, and the need to take care of ourselves. One of the things that I think, and it's happening in the volunteer world as well as the paid staff world, there's a sense of exhaustion. There's a sense of, how long is this going to go on? We have pandemic, and we have fires, and we have bad air. So part of it is just a reminder to kind of remember what we're dealing with, and also to remember to not only be kind to yourself, but be kind to the people around you. So I just take a breath. It's a challenging time, and we will get through it together. In terms of volunteerism, one of the things that I was delighted to hear from Candace was the placement of VISTA members at sites to help manage volunteers. Because as someone who's been involved in kind of the volunteer management world for a while, I want to tell you that volunteers are not free. It takes an infrastructure, it takes management, it takes staff time, it takes policies and procedures, it takes job descriptions. And so I just want to remind us that those pieces need to be built into a program as well. SF Card is a disaster resilience organization. We work with nonprofits on plans. Part of that plan is a plan to how to incorporate volunteers, how to engage volunteers successfully. The other thing that SF Card, we are the community preparedness liaison for a federal consortium called UASI, Urban Area Security Initiative. And come October, there's actually going to be a 3-hour webinar on volunteer management. I want to encourage people who are interested in kind of learning learning some tips and some best practices might be interested in that. So I want to let you know that that's happening October 7th and 8th. The other thing about volunteer programs is don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. You know, everybody's trying to do the very best they can. In a disaster, you don't want to put clients in a vulnerable clients who are who are already vulnerable into a precarious situation. But there are other positions that that you may need to not do the same level of screening that you need to do for other volunteers. So I want to encourage you, when you're thinking about volunteer positions, to really match the level of screening with the let me take a minute and just grab a drink of water. I'm sorry.
Self-care.
Thank you, Michael. I was just thinking those very words. So I want to remind you that just in terms of volunteer policies and procedures, match the level of screening with the level of vulnerability of your clients. That's so important. We want to protect ourselves. And in terms of speaking with faith-based groups, one of the things that I'd like to remind you is that faith-based groups I encourage faith-based organizations to build teams of volunteers who can work together, who can volunteer at the same space, who can decide that a faith-based organization can take a shift at a food bank, can take a shift at a food pantry, and work together in community, socially distanced, of course. And it's a good way to get involved, and it's a good way to make those connections. The other thing about volunteering is take a look at who is in your community. Who can you involve in this effort? One of the things we talk about both for faith-based groups and other nonprofits who are working to engage volunteers is take a look at who's around you. One of the things right now is with students, oftentimes they can get school credit for doing volunteering. Engage those students, engage those high school and college students into your program. There's a lot going on out there. Take advantage of it. Take advantage of the goodness. Take advantage of the goodness in people's hearts in terms of volunteering. And again, I want to close. Just please take care of yourselves as well.
Did you have a question for Candace?
I do have a question for Candace. I'm delighted to hear that you're helping organizations during the time of the pandemic, but during non-crisis times, how can California volunteers help sustain those volunteer programs so they can continue not only when we're having an emergency, but before and after?
Great question.
Yes, thank you for that. So I know that for our sort of operation, you know, we're, myself included, all temporary employees who are brought on to work in this kind of emergency interim. And one of our big goals, in addition to connecting with food banks and with volunteer centers, is to help to foster communication among those partners. That we know that the important work that the COADs and the VOADs do during emergency times is really valuable. And so doing what we can to help organize those meetings, those monthly check-ins, so that organizations can have regular blue sky conversations outside of sort of the emergency emergency mode that we all are in right now. So that has been a challenge. I definitely acknowledge that it's been, many of the food banks we were speaking with, for them, they don't feel that they're in the transition out of this emergency state yet. They're very much in it. And so I think we are trying to be forward thinking in how we address that. One of the ways that we hope to be of use is through the VISTA program. These VISTA members will serve for 1 year at each site. And so we're hoping that by giving them our kind of institutional knowledge that we're sort of learning in real time, that we can help to empower them to be the kind of representatives on the ground for California volunteers on how to connect individual food banks with the larger mission of volunteerism in the state.
Thank you. And I want to kind of just highlight something that Phyllis mentioned, and that is, having different congregations working together. And I'm going to give a shout out, and I hope Katie appreciates this, to Old First Presbyterian Church, which hosts an interfaith pantry with neighboring congregations, a Jewish synagogue and other churches in the neighborhood. And those are examples and models to be emulated. And I know that if congregations are out there listening, we're glad to put you in touch with Old First, as well as Katie, to talk about the mechanics of how to get something like that started. Now we move on to our last but not least, Meredith Terrell, who I have known for many, many years, from her work with the Red Cross to now with Meals on Wheels, where she is the Chief Program Officer, but also she is the coordinator for the chair of San Francisco Volunteer Organizations Active in Disaster, VOAD, which I know works very closely with you, Candace. And so Meredith, thank you. The floor is yours, dear partner in disaster preparedness.
Great, thank you, Michael, and hello, everybody. It's wonderful to be with everybody today. I think the discussion, the presentations so far have been absolutely fabulous. I think we all know that volunteers are the backbone of what makes response work, what makes social services able to operate. For those of you who don't know, VOAD in San Francisco, we are a coalition of nonprofits and faith-based organizations working together to build better cooperation in times of disaster. In San Francisco, we serve just our county, and we focus on community recovery efforts in partnership with our local governments and agencies. However, if there are folks not from San Francisco that are on this call, everybody has a COAD in their area or a VOAD, different acronyms, same organization. And we operate under the umbrella of the National VOAD, whose core principles are the 4 C's: cooperation, communication, coordination, and collaboration to build strong, resilient communities and deliver hopes in times of need. So what does that really mean? It means that as nonprofit organizations, we come together in order to support ourselves, our community, and work with our partners in order to help prepare, respond, and recover from disaster. As Michael mentioned, I wear 2 hats, one as Meals on Wheels, San Francisco, the other one as the VOAD. So I'm really going to speak mostly from my VOAD point of view with our membership and throw in a few examples of what it's been like during this response with volunteers from San Francisco Meals on Wheels. I think I have 2 sort of large observations from our membership that have happened during this response when it comes to volunteerism. The first is organizations that didn't have volunteer programs or had smaller volunteer programs, which had to shift services that required volunteer assistance, really had the most difficulty. A really good example of this are congregate meal sites. So for those of you who don't know, congregate meal sites are at locations, many of them at like senior centers, where folks can come in and have a meal together, can congregate, and have other services. With COVID, obviously that wasn't possible, and they had to really shift their model to home delivered. So for organizations that didn't have the infrastructure to be able to turn on the dime, that was a really difficult process for them. Some of them had small, volunteer programs for other things, but this was brand new for everybody. So I think the point of that is it goes back to preparedness. It also comes to partnership. Trying to build something in the middle of a response is very difficult. Now, did anybody think that we would be completely flipping our model from gather everybody together in a response in order to provide support to no, everybody has to be away for social distancing? No, but that's where as partners, we could come in and lend a hand, say, do you want to borrow some of our systems? Can we help adapt some of our systems so that we can help you get what you need so that you can continue to serve your clients? So that was, I think, where we saw with our members the largest difficulty. And then with organizations that had established volunteer programs, especially ones that provided direct service, that was really hard. Going into the community and face-to-face service, social service delivery was very difficult. And we lost, I think I can speak for my organization being one of those organizations, as well as other partner organizations. We lost a lot of volunteers. A lot of our volunteers were themselves in high-risk groups. And I believe that both Phyllis and Katie mentioned this when they were speaking. We had to pivot, turn on a dime and create new policies, training, providing PPE, ensuring that we had volunteer and client safety, and managing all that, managing feedback loops, making sure that we didn't skip a beat when it came to service delivery, as well as making sure that people were safe doing what they needed to do. So for both staff and volunteers, we had to completely recreate at Meals on Wheels and some of our partner organizations, how we do our day-to-day business. And I think when I look at it, at Meals on Wheels, we were one of the organizations that we were really blessed to have an outpouring of volunteer support. And I know that Candace spoke about that in just in the Bay Area. We have a lot of people, and we had a lot of people that weren't sort of our quote unquote normal volunteers, because people, especially younger people, found themselves working from home or furloughed, and they were healthy, they were not in a high risk group, and they were able to come and help. So we're lucky our demand for volunteers is not quite what the food banks is. So we were very lucky to receive all the volunteer support we needed. And it was very important because we had a lot of staff that couldn't work because they were in high risk groups. So at the beginning, we were really able to utilize volunteers. We were able to turn on a dime and have them fulfill not only the volunteer responsibilities, but some of our staffing responsibilities, until we got to a point where we could change our service delivery system and get accustomed to that. And I think one of the key things that enabled Meals on Wheels to do that is that we have the technology and we have folks with expertise in order to provide those volunteer opportunities and make them accessible. And that's another thing where I saw a really big difference between some of the organizations that were struggling and the organizations that were able to more easily provide those opportunities. Now, it was all hard work, on all sides, but I think that's one of the sort of the keys, if you will, for success. And I think in all of this, whether people had trouble at the beginning, whether it was a longer road for some organizations to figure out how to safely have volunteers come back and work them into the fold, whether they were able to do it immediately, volunteers really saved the day. There's no way that the social services in this city and county could have been done without volunteers. And we owe everybody a huge amount of thanks for that. And it's been a journey. Some of the organizations, our partner organizations like Glide and St. Anthony's that provide food, I know it's been a little bit of a longer journey for them in order to to reincorporate volunteers, but they're at that point now. So I think all of us coming together, and we've all been coming together and sharing best practices and sharing support where we can. I really think that's the key, where we can help one another, and anybody in the nonprofit community will share whatever. It's not a competition. There's enough need, unfortunately, to go around. So I think it's really important to, to join groups, to share information, to share knowledge, to share experience and expertise. So my question for Candace is, what tools have you seen organizations utilize for volunteer management that might be helpful for others?
Thanks, Meredith. I know it's been really great to work with you, and like you mentioned, just the collaborative efforts in the area. It's amazing to see and to be a part of it. So for one of the things I've been doing is listening a lot to the organizations and the methods that they've used and kind of the trial and error process. One of the things that I think is really helpful, again, to highlight the SF Marin Food Bank, there is a really great, I think, group of volunteers who can identify their specific skills on the website. So really specializing the recruitment process so that anybody with bilingual abilities or with an ability to drive and to deliver food, giving volunteers the opportunity to voice their preference for work, as well as just what they're able to do right up front is really helpful, I think. And that's something we've learned from with California volunteers, bringing on such a big group, knowing now that we really need to make it a more specialized process. And so that's one thing that I think has really helped. Another method, and just going back to the same concern about safety for volunteers and for clients, is by asking for volunteers to commit on a regular basis. In the Bay Area has been something that I think, again, just because of the kind of big hearts of all of the community members who do get involved, that's been successful that I've seen at the Alameda Food Bank. So they've asked for volunteers who are available on a Tuesday, that they volunteer for every Tuesday in a month. And so that's something that's been helpful, and it's not always going to be an option for everybody to do that, but I think that's kind of the end goal that we see and hear from so many sites, is we want to sort of shore up that intermittent volunteerism and create a lifelong sort of volunteer. And how do we do that? How do we encourage volunteers? One of the ways that is also helpful is, I think, to highlight the volunteer experience through social media and through the websites for these food banks and pantries, volunteer centers, by saying, we want to highlight this individual who's volunteered 500 hours of their time. They've served this many meals to families. And I think, again, people are doing this out of the kindness of their heart. They want to be involved and help their community, but the recognition is, I think, always a great, it can be a helpful incentive to get people sort of engaged and feel part of the larger mission, and not just that they're volunteering for 3 hours and then it ends there. I think that to bring them into the fold is really helpful. But we're continually learning. So I know that there's definitely more methods in the R&D phase right now that we're hoping to kind of spread throughout the state.
Yeah. And what would you say for smaller organizations? The food bank, as well as, Meals on Wheels in San Francisco, are well-resourced organizations and have the technology and the know-how to do that. I know that with, it's been a big concern about for smaller organizations, and organizations specifically in San Francisco that have contracts with city government have been really tied in and have gotten a lot of fantastic support. Ones that don't have contracts and are a little bit smaller, a little bit more grassroots, have struggled to get that contact and that support. And I think those are the types of organizations that may not have the resources to do all this online stuff. So what would you say for those organizations?
I think one of and I've learned from you, Meredith, actually, is that that sort of coalition building, by joining up some of the larger organizations and becoming active members in their VOAD, COAD, and volunteer centers, and using that elevated platform to sort of broadcast their message and their need. We're hoping to be that for the state as well, without, again, competing with existing amazing resources, but to also just be that bigger loudspeaker for smaller organizations to say, hey, we have this opportunity for you to get involved. And sometimes that can work out because the volunteers who are looking to get involved are in that exact community. And so I think that's definitely a challenge, but one of the benefits of elevating that message from smaller organizations is they're going to have that opportunity to engage people in their immediate community, is what we hope. So
thank you, Meredith, for those questions, and thank you, Candace. You know, when I introduced you, I said I noted the long time relationship that the San Francisco Interfaith Council has with California volunteers. And this is just the beginning of a conversation. And we look forward to being of support, and we will be sending out those links with opportunities to be involved with Californians for All and the volunteer matches. So I'll look forward to that. Thank you for the gift of time you have given us and the incredible presentation you've given us. Also want to say very big thank yous to Katie Mann McKnight, from the Director of the Community Engagement for San Francisco Marin Food Bank, Phyllis Onstad, Program Manager at SF Card, and Meredith Terrell, the Chief Program Officer for Meals on Wheels and Chair of San Francisco Volunteer Organizations Active in Disaster. I know that you're the boots on the ground. I know that managing volunteers is critical and important. And we want to be of support to you in any way we can moving forward, as we have in the past. As we're saying thank yous, I also want to say a very special thank you to San Francisco Interfaith Council Program Administrative Associate Cynthia Zambucas. All of the communications you get are done through Cynthia, and she is my right and my left hand. So thank you, Cynthia. And we would be remiss if we did not thank the COVID Command Center's Joint Information Center Virtual Outreach Team. Coordinator John McKnight is on the line with us today. Our producer today, as she's been for many, many weeks, is the amazing Lynn Mays. And she's been assisted by leads Sharon Walton, Trey Russell Allen, and Hugh Lee, who are with us today. We invite you to join us next week, as we will hear from the San Francisco County Transportation Authority, which is studying solutions to anticipate post-COVID traffic congestion in downtown San Francisco, including congestion pricing. We'll be talking about issues of equity, so we invite you all to join us then. We began this program with a moment of meditation and prayer. I would just ask, as we depart today, that we keep in mind those who have been impacted by the fires in our neighboring counties, the evacuees, those who have been injured, lost lives and property. So many of our partners here today are working directly with them. They remain in our prayers, but also I know that there will be volunteer opportunities to assist them in this particular time of need and disaster. So God bless you all and God keep you. And we look forward to seeing you next week. This concludes our program for today.